Morning. If you guys over there can't see Sombrero Man here or the sheep, you might miss out on something later, but it's up to you. There are actually empty seats here if you really feel inclined to get a front row seat. Guess what the sermon topic is about this morning? You guys are good. I love the opportunity to be here this morning. Do you know that? I actually love this church. That means I actually love you guys as a people group. I honestly love it. And I'm just going to follow along with our songs and prayers that have already been offered and just ask the Lord to come again. Lord, you are so good. What a privilege we have to partner with you and just bring forth your truth, Jesus, and share it with the world. And I'm so excited, Lord, that you get to speak to us today again. Come, Lord, and open up our minds that we would grasp it and it would actually be branded right into our brains what you want to say to us. Amen. Have you ever read John chapter 9? I love it. I know. Yeah. That's good. Tell your mom, and whoever said that, tell your mom and dad to get on it. It's a good chapter. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. Super simple sermon. We're going to read John chapter 9. That's it. That's all we're doing today. Okay? Who is John chapter 9? Which testament is that in? New Testament. It's one of the Gospels. Who's the main character in those Gospels? Jesus, right? They're all written about him. They are from his life and ministry on earth, right? And so John chapter 9 verse 1. It says this. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Before we go any farther, I want to point out some things to you, okay? You already know there's a laptop over here and a box, and there is a sombrero guy here, and there is a sheep and another box, okay? Can you guys see that? Wes, can you see that from the back? Perfect. So as Jesus is walking along, he sees this man blind from birth. I want to point out a couple interesting things as we go through here. What was the question that this is actually really important to understand later. What was the question that the disciples asked Jesus? Who sinned, right? Exactly. Who sinned? And they said, was it this man or was it his parents? Right? They're going, what was it? And Jesus actually goes, it was neither of those, right? It was actually something outside of what you would imagine. It was this. And what was it? Yeah, so that his power might be displayed. He said that's why this has occurred, right? It has nothing to do with who sinned, right? Can you guys hear me? I also want to point out something else. Can you guys hear me? Fantastic. Do you guys know what this thing is? Ask the question. In case there's any oldies out here, this is you guys can tell the answer. This is the most common answer ever, okay? So what we had the disciples ask the question. Jesus. Phones. And what did they refer to Jesus as? You guys know what this thing is? Which means? Teacher. Well done. Okay? That's important to note. You're going to recognize the importance of that as we dig into this chapter, but they asked Jesus that question. Okay? How's that? Can you guys see although they kind of were thinking it was one of the two answers, they didn't assume that they knew. They asked the teacher the question, okay? He's doing okay. And we're going to keep on going. Jesus says in verse 4, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Morning. Night is coming when no one can work. If you guys over there can't see Sombrero Man here or the sheep, you might miss out on something later, but there's some stuff in here that is going to be deeper than what we're going to tackle this morning that might really feel inclined to get a front or to part 2. But let me ask you this question. Jesus said he's the light of the world while he's in the world. Who's going to be the light of the world after he's not in the world? You guys are good. Because from here on, when he said that, he wasn't around for, in human form, walking on the earth. The opportunity to be here this morning. You know that? I actually love this church. That means I actually love you guys as a people group. Who's going to be the light of the world after I honestly love it. And I'm just going to follow along with our songs and prayers that have already been offered. And
he told his disciples, and it's for us too, and he said, you are the light of the world.
You are so good.
Right? We might dig into that next Sunday.
We have to partner with you and
there's an amazing truth.
bring forth your truth, Jesus.
After saying
and
this,
share it with the world.
And
I'm so excited, Lord, that you get to speak to us today.
Made some mud with the saliva.
Come, Lord, and open up our minds that we
eyes.
would grasp it, and it would actually be branded right into our brains.
Can you imagine that for a second?
What you want to say to us.
Like, I bet
Amen.
you if I would do an actual real demonstration of what that may have looked like,
have you ever read John
chapter 9?
If I had a little bowl of dirt here and would spit in it long enough that I could make mud out of it.
That's good. Tell your mom and whoever said that, tell your mom and dad to get on it.
Right?
It's a good
That's
chapter.
Graphic.
Okay? This is what Jesus
so this is what we're going to do. Super simple sermon. We're going to read John chapter 9. That's it. That's all we're doing today.
Go.
Okay? He told him. And wash in the pool of Siloam.
Who is
so
John chapter 9?
And came
Which
home
testament is that in?
Praise the Lord.
New Testament. But I want to ask you a question.
It's one of the
I want to
Gospels.
point something out.
Could
the
Jesus
main character
have
in
healed
those
that man
Gospels?
on the spot?
Jesus.
Absolutely,
Right?
he could have, right?
They're all written about
Why
him there
did he
from his
send
life
him
and
to the
ministry
pool
on
of
earth,
Siloam?
right?
Because think
And
about
so
what that
John
actually is
chapter
saying.
9
This
verse
guy
1.
is blind. Now here comes Jesus. He has an encounter with Jesus. Jesus spits on the dirt, makes some mud, smears it on his eyes. Now you got a blind guy with saliva mud on his eyes. And Jesus says, go wash in the pool of Siloam. So you got this blind guy walking down the street, excuse me, whatever. He's trying to get, where's the pool of Siloam? I know it's out here somewhere. I hear it all the time. I can hear it. I can hear people. Well, I don't know how he knew it was there, but maybe he's going, asking somebody, can you take me to the pool of Siloam? Why are you going there? I don't know. Jesus put some mud on my eyes and told me to go there. Right? And can you imagine that? I want to point something out. There's at least 3 other times in the Gospels where Jesus heals a blind man or blind men. Okay? One other time, Jesus took a blind man by the hand, led him out of the village, and then also using spit, touched his eyes, and said, can you see? And the guy's like, yeah, I can kind of see, but people look like trees. They're blurry. He's like, let me do it again. And he touched him again, and then he could see clearly, right? Another time, there was two blind men crying out to Jesus and saying, Lord, have mercy on us. And he came to them and said, do you believe in me? And they said, yes. And he touched their eyes, and he said, according to your faith, it has been done to you. You are healed instantly on the spot, right? Bartimaeus was also blind. There's a third guy I know of. He said he was sitting on the side of the road begging for Jesus' mercy. Jesus comes up to him and asks, what do you want? And he says, I want to see. And Jesus said, receive your sight, for your faith has healed you. And he was healed instantly. But here, Jesus puts mud on the guy's eyes and says, go wash in that pool of Siloam. Why? Obedience. Yeah. I love it. Mel said it, and as soon as she saw me look at her, she's like, well, that might be wrong. Then she pointed at Robbie, said it. I love it. And that could be actually, you know what the honest answer is? We don't know for sure why, right? The Bible doesn't tell us specifically why, but I'll tell you something that I do know for sure. I do know for a fact that if you're blind and now somebody who has told you that he's Jesus, has put mud on your eyes and told you to go wash in that pool of Siloam, in order for you to now walk down the street as a blind man with mud on your eyes, believing that you're going to get healed once you go wash in that pool, takes what? Faith. Absolutely. And many, many, many of Jesus' miracles, he said, you commended for your faith, and that's why you're healed. I think that has to do with why he sent him to the pool of Siloam, although God is very creative, and I'm sure he has more reasons than that. Okay? But we know for a fact that he was demonstrating some faith. Verse 8. So this blind, because he comes home seeing, okay? His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed that he was, and others said, no, he only looks like him. But he himself insisted, I'm the man, right? So, you know what's alarming to me here? This guy was sitting and begging and blind. As soon as he wasn't doing those things, people couldn't even recognize him. That's embarrassing, right? Right? Are we much different? Like these people labeled him. Who's that guy? Oh, he's the guy sitting and begging. He's blind. Did he not have people that sat and came and knew his name? Or find out what he likes or who he is, his character? Nothing. All they know is the blind guy. As soon as he's not blind, now he's walking. Oh, must be a different guy. Right? Totally labeled. You know what? We could park here. We could actually probably preach a whole sermon on this. But maybe I'll just say this. We should be careful, and I know I need to be careful of how to label people, because God changes people. Right? That's what these people saw. They saw somebody get changed, but they were still stuck on the old label. Okay? Verse 10. These are his neighbors talking. How then were your eyes opened, they asked. He replied, the man they call Jesus made some mud, put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. That's the whole story right there. Where is this man, they asked him. Well, I don't know. Right? How's he supposed to know? He's never even seen the guy. Right? Can you imagine for a second what it would be like to see for the first time as an adult? It would be what? What's the word that would describe that? It would be amazing. It would be mind-blowing. Yeah. Seeing everything for the first time, and a bunch of it, you probably touched it. You know how it feels like. You're like, oh, wow, right? When the sun comes up the next morning, what do you think he's doing? Sleeping in? With his eyes closed? Probably didn't sleep for a week, right? Just looking at everything, right? It would be amazing. Seeing everything for the first time. Nothing around him had changed, but now his eyes are open, right? So verse 13, they brought this to the Pharisees, the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. And you can just hear the pin drop in the room. Uh-oh, that's going to be trouble, right? Verse 15, therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. Here he goes again. He put mud on my eyes, the man replied. I washed, now I see. I love it how he breaks it down, even simpler for the Pharisees, okay? Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God. They're talking about Jesus. This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others were asking, how can a sinner perform such signs? And so they were what? Divided. The Pharisees actually instantaneously judged Jesus and said, there is no way that guy is a follower of God because he's not abiding by the Sabbath laws, right? But then along comes this supernatural healing, causes a problem for them. What's the problem? What's that? Yeah, something going on, right? They're at a conflict, but what's the problem? Jesus' behavior did not fit into their theology. Right? They kind of had God figured out. Old Testament law memorized to a T. 613 commandments, probably could tell them to you alphabetically, numerically, chronologically, all of it. Right? And now here comes a healing on the Sabbath, and it didn't fit into their theology. God is working in a way that they're not used to him working. What's going on? So either he is God, and he's working in a different way than they expected, or he's clearly a false teacher, right? I want to point something out here. The Pharisees, and if you doubt this statement, I could prove it to you if you read the whole chapter and you study it, you'll realize exactly this. The Pharisees are willfully blind. Not of evil intention. Their intentions aren't bad. Their intentions aren't evil, but they are willfully blind because of a stubborn refusal to believe and have faith. In fact, but it's not Pharisees only. Dennis mentioned this in Sunday school. Pharisees, don't just lump all the Pharisees into a garbage can and say they're all terrible. They're not. The disciples, Jesus actually came and rebuked the disciples in Mark 16. He rebuked the disciples for exactly the same thing, a stubborn refusal to believe and a lack of faith. Okay? That's a human tendency. It's not easy to believe in the supernatural. Would you agree? You know why not? It's not natural. Exactly right. It's not in our nature. That's actually a powerful statement. It's hard to believe in the supernatural because it's not in our nature. Because we like to know things in our nature that we can control and touch and feel and see, and we can, yeah, I get it, I understand. And as soon as you talk about something supernatural, that's a little uncomfortable, right? Verse 17, then they turned again to the blind man. Who turned to the blind man? Pharisees. They turned again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man replied, he's a prophet. Okay, so he is, what you see what the man is doing here? These guys are conflicted. Either he's a false prophet or he's God, right? This guy's weighing in and saying, guys, I know the answer. He's God, right? That's what he's saying. He's a prophet. This blind man knows this man is from God, okay? Verse 18, they still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. Okay, so I want to stop here for a second. The passionate story of somebody's life who had been completely changed was not enough evidence for the Pharisees to believe. Not only do they believe or doubt that God could do the miracle, now look what they're doubting. We think you might even be a fake, right? Probably were never even blind all those 40 years or whatever. You probably were faking it. Right? Does that sound logical? I know that's high on my priority list. I would just wish I could just pretend to be blind for 30 years or something. Right? They're thinking he's a fake. Because of what? They're in a problem. God doesn't fit into their theology. Right? Verse 19. So they haul in the parents. Is this your son? They ask. Is this the one you say was born blind? Because we don't believe you. We just are you saying this is your son born blind? How is it that he can now see? We know he is our son, the parents answered. And we know he was born blind. Okay, so they dismissed the fake guy part. Okay? But how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He can speak for himself. Right? You see what they're doing there? If you've read the chapter before, you know. If this is your first time going through the chapter, you're like, seems like a fairly logical answer. Just ask the blind guy. Right? It's actually a painful, painful, painful answer. It seems innocent, but they know very well why their son can see again. They know for a fact it was Jesus Christ, the Messiah, who came and healed him. And they are afraid of the repercussions of saying it, and so they're just like, oh, you better ask him. Verse 22, his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, he is of age, ask him. Does that not break your heart a little bit? Why did the parents not give credit to God? They were scared of people, of men. Yeah. Should we be afraid of men or God? It's easy to say, right? On one hand, you have God who can determine whether you're going to heaven or hell. On the other hand, you have some people here whose life is like a mist and a vapor. Who should you be afraid of? Well, God. How easy is that to live out? It's not that easy all the time, right? But it's heartbreaking because these people, their son was supernaturally healed. They know it. They know it was Jesus. In fact, Jesus had said this was the whole point of his life. He has been suffering as a blind man for many, many years. All of his growing up years into adulthood, he has been blind. For this reason, that God would be glorified. And what did the parents do? Oh, don't tell anybody. We might get in trouble. We might get kicked out of the... the church. That hurts, right? It's not going to look good in the church. Isn't that brutal? Verse 24, a second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. Okay, the Pharisees have not settled this yet. Give glory to God by telling the truth, they said. We know this man is a sinner. They're referring to Jesus. They're saying, we know Jesus is a sinner. We know this whole experience is not from God. Now fess up and tell us the same thing. This was not from God. I'll just ask you a very simple question. Were they open-minded? Not really. Were they, sometimes I refer to this idea of praying from a neutral position. Were they praying from a neutral position? No, they were heavily leaning to this side, okay? We know for a fact Jesus is a false teacher. This is nothing but, well, if he's a false teacher and he just did a miracle, I would have to say they're pushing him to the demonic side, okay? And now they're saying, now say something that lines up with what we're thinking, okay? They are heavily biased to that side. Here's what the blind man said. Verse 25, he replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know. I was blind, but now I see. He's breaking it down. Really simple now, right? Never mind the mud and all that. I was blind, now I see, right? He's like, I don't know the details. I actually cannot even explain some of it. But here's what I know. I have been completely changed. Verse 26, then they asked him, I think they probably pulled their glasses down to the bottom of their nose and said, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? Exactly how did this happen? In verse 27, he answers, I have told you already and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Oh, I would have loved to have been there. Then they hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciples. We are disciples of Moses. Right? They probably said it like that too, trying to be like, right? I don't know about that. But anyway, in the NIV it says they hurled insults at him and said, you're this fellow's disciple. So I'm not actually totally sure if they hurled insults at him, and then in addition to the insults, they added that, hey, and by the way, you're a disciple of Jesus. Or if they just thought that calling him a disciple of Jesus was an insult. I'm not sure, okay? Oh, can't even imagine somebody being insulted by being called Jesus' disciple. But anyway, where am I on my notes here? Somewhere. Here's my suspicion. I think they probably added some insults to that. And in a they were Pharisees, right? Everything was letter of the law, and so they probably didn't use any bad language in the synagogue, but here's what I would imagine they called him. They probably referred to him as a disturber of the peace. Because they had a perfectly good thing going here, right? These guys knew the law. They went to church every Sunday, plus more, right? They did all the festivals, they did all the stuff, right? They tithed religiously on everything, money, spices, the whole bit. They carried boxes of verses on their arms, big boxes, right? Check it out. They're like Popeye. Look at my verses box, right? They had seats of honor in the church, right? When they came into church, you guys come sit in the nice chairs, right? People in public places and marketplaces, this is going to the mall. People referred to them as what? Teacher, rabbi. That's interesting, okay? We know that from other parts in the Gospels. They wore the right kind of clothes. They looked the part. They had perfect, flawless religion. And now, here comes this guy who experiences something and completely goes and ruins it because now they're at a place, well, what are we going to do with this? It doesn't fit. And then they're basically saying, you are a follower of something crazy. You are following a false doctrine. We are followers of Moses. You guys know what the word ironic means? That's ironic. Because this is in which book of the Bible? John. In John chapter 1, when Philip found Nathanael, when he's first Jesus called his disciples, Philip calls Nathanael, and know what he told Nathanael? Nathanael, we found the one that Moses talked about in the law. It's Jesus. What did he know? That Moses wrote about Jesus, right? Jesus himself, it's in the same book. In John 5, Jesus said, okay, Jesus does not mince his words with the Pharisees, okay? When he's talking to some of these Jewish religious leaders, I'm going to read to you what he says in John 5. Do not think that I will accuse you before the Father. You know who your accuser is going to be? It's going to be Moses, on whom your hopes are set. Because if you had believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But since you don't believe what he wrote, how are you going to believe what I say? That's what Jesus already told some of them. Maybe these guys didn't hear it. I don't know. They are so close to knowing Jesus. They have memorized massive portions, if not all of the law. And Moses actually talks about Jesus in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 18, you can read that in Acts as well. Peter knows it. The early church knows it. It seems like everybody knows it, except these guys. But yet they claim to be followers of Moses. Incredibly ironic. Verse 29. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. If you haven't picked up on it already, I want to point out to you the tension that is there between Jesus and these incredible religious followers of the law. Okay? Basically, nobody in their day knew the scriptures better than they did, yet they hated Jesus, who was talked about in those very scriptures. They hated Jesus so much they wanted to kill him. Because basically he didn't fit into their theology, right? Jesus did not mince his words with them. There's one time he told them, he says, you guys travel over land and sea to go and convert one guy. And when you convert that one guy, you make him twice as much a child of hell as you are. Woo. And they're so close to knowing him. Verse 30. Here's the blind guy. He says, now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, but he opened my eyes. Right? This man he's getting in. He is not backing down. Right? These guys are trying to convince him that he wasn't even blind. He's like, no, I was blind, and now I see. Why can't you just celebrate the goodness with me? The Pharisees want him to deny it. The blind man continues. He says in 31, he says, we know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. You recognize that? From like verse 2. You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And what did they do? Threw him out of what? The church. Oh. The Pharisees are accusing him of the same question that the disciples originally asked Jesus, but here the Pharisees, they're not asking. They're coming to their own conclusion based on what? Yeah, their own knowledge and understanding. It's almost like their greatest fear would be for some reason to not have an answer. Hey, come to us. We got the answers. You guys call us teacher. We are teacher. We're rabbi. When we see you in the mall, just call me teacher, right? The Pharisees were referred to as teacher everywhere they went. People acknowledged them. They had the long tassels on the robe and all this stuff. What did Jesus tell his people? Who should they refer to as teacher? What did Jesus tell the disciples? You guys don't call each other teacher. You have one teacher. It's me, Jesus. Right? That's in Matthew 23. Have you guys ever heard that statement, Jesus as functional Lord? There's a song on CHPN that sings that. Jesus is functional. If Jesus is the functional Lord of your life, who would you go to for answers? Jesus. If Jesus is not the actual functional Lord, King, boss of your life, then who do you go to for answers? Google, me, right? You got the answers. Or go to somebody smart like Google, right? It's different. I don't think Jesus is hung up. If somebody refers to you as a teacher, and you are a teacher in a school or something, I don't think Jesus is worried about that. But when you claim to have all the answers, and because you have all the answers, you don't need to go to Jesus, that's a problem. Okay? Let's keep on talking about this for a little bit. Exactly what the parents had feared happened to their son. He got thrown out of church. He was excommunicated. Why? He opposed the leaders. He stood up to them. Something supernatural happened to him, right? He just exercised a tiny little bit of faith, and then something supernatural happened to him. Now it got a little messy. We can't figure this out, so out you go. Verse 35. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, what did he say? Oh, heard that you got thrown out of church. So sorry about that. Oh, man, I hope that goes. Did those guys make fun of you? Did your feelings get hurt? Maybe next time you should change how you talk to the Pharisees. Don't offend them like that, okay? Is that what Jesus said? Jesus asked them a question. He said, do you believe? Do you what? Do you believe in the Son of Man? Oh, what's the question, church? Right there, what's the question? Read it. Do you believe in the Son of Man? Right? That's actually the question. It's a question of what? Faith. Yeah. Do you believe? Do you believe that this supernatural thing which has just happened in your life was from God? And here comes the man's answer. He says, who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me so that I may believe in him. And I just got to stop right there for a second, because what is he right there? What is he? When you're missing water and you really want some, or you're missing food and you really want some, he's hungry and thirsty. Who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me who he is. I want to believe in him. Right? He's hungry. Most beautiful words ever. Jesus said, can you imagine being there? Your life has completely changed. You just got kicked out of the church, but you're like, I don't care. I just want to know who Jesus is, right? And can you tell me who Jesus is? And Jesus says, you have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. Then the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. He acknowledged his faith. He says, I believe, right? And what was the result? What's the result, guys? Say it. He worshiped him, right? Do you think that this guy was running and jumping and hugging Jesus? Or did he fall on his knees? I don't know, right? I don't know. I sometimes think the first time I read this, I'm like, oh, if it was me, I would probably just give him a great big hug and want to just love Jesus. And then I'm like, no, I'm not sure if that would be the right idea. Maybe I would be on my knees. I don't know. I don't even know what I would do. I would love to know what he did. He started worshiping Jesus like he had never worshiped Jesus before. But the story's not over yet. Verse 39. Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." He's sometimes a deep thinker like that, right? What do you think Jesus was referring to when he said, the blind will see and those who see will become blind? Is he talking about physical blindness in your eyes? No, because not all the people that could see suddenly went blind, right? Like that would probably be in the history books, right? What's he talking about? What kind of blindness? Spiritual blindness, exactly right. He's talking about spiritual blindness. And the Pharisees and the people who were standing in that circle and listening to Jesus speak heard it too. They picked up on it. Some of the Pharisees, verse 40, some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, "What? Are we blind too?" The Pharisees, you see how they're already offended and threatened by this comment, right? He didn't say, "You Pharisees," but they're like, "What? You talking about us?" They know it's about them, right? And they're like, "What? Are you saying we're blind? Spiritually blind?" Jesus doesn't stop at going, "Yeah, that's exactly your problem." He adds to it, okay? Verse 41. Jesus said, that should be in red, by the way, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." Right? Jesus is saying that all those who claim to know all the religious truths will actually discover that they're blind. And those who recognize their spiritual poverty, if you want to call it that, will see. Okay? There's a humility aspect to that. The blind man, over and over, already, just in chapter 9, what we already know, he acknowledged that he actually didn't know all the answers. He didn't know. I was blind, now I see. I don't know, fill in the blanks. The Pharisees, over and over, what do they say? "Oh, we know. We know exactly what happened, and this is how it was." Right? They have religious pride. If they had confessed their ignorance and admitted their spiritual blindness, they would be guiltless. Instead, their conscientious and willful objection to the work of Jesus established their guilt. So this is an interesting thing. There's actually a similarity between the supernatural spiritual work that Jesus did in John chapter 9 as there is to the supernatural work that Jesus wants to do in your life through what we are learning about on Wednesday nights at Hearing God. There is a supernatural aspect to a relationship, a real personal relationship with God, which we cannot fully understand and comprehend. It sometimes feels like it's a little bit outside of the box, right? In John chapter 9, a blind man was supernaturally healed. On Wednesday evenings, this whole thing about hearing God and listening to God and that kind of stuff, there's a supernatural event where he wants to speak to you personally. It's a supernatural thing. It's amazing. If you think, and I actually think that's actually what he's talking about in John chapter 9. That's my opinion. I'll tell you why that's my opinion. Because for homework, you should go home and read John chapter 10, verses 1 to 21. It actually reads like there shouldn't be a chapter break. Jesus just continues what he's saying right here. We read it, he just keeps on talking. And you know what he talks about? He talks about his followers that he calls personally by name. He says, my followers actually know what my voice sounds like, and he describes the relationship with his followers as a personal, two-way relationship where he says, we know each other. He says, my followers actually learn to discern my voice from all the other voices. And then another reason why I think that passage, John 10, 1 to 21, is actually a continuation of the story. Andy Stanley says the same thing, by the way. In verse 21, guess what problem the Pharisees are running into? They're still on that thing. Like, is this guy from God? He can't be from God. He worked on the Sabbath. But yet we see this supernatural healing of a blind man. They're still talking about that same story in chapter 10, verse 21. So here's the conclusion. There's two boxes on the stage here, or up in the front here. What do they represent? Knowledge, close. Those boxes represent ways in which God works. What does the stuffy over there represent? I'll tell you this. The stuffy, this guy over here, and that laptop either represent a person or a group of people. Who do you think the stuffy represents? He's got one eye missing. That's the blind man right there. This is the blind man. And what is it? It's a sheep. Well, that's interesting. And what's this? Ways in which God worked, right? Healed him. Made him see. You know what the laptop is? Pharisees. Because they think they have what? All the answers. They think they got God figured out. God typically works inside of this box. We got it figured out. And all of a sudden, oh shoot. Now what? He got out of the box. He worked over there. How's this work? We're in a problem. Who does this represent? I'll tell you what. This guy can turn this way, and he can turn this way. Which way can he not turn? Up. Who is this? Who is it? The parents. Oh, look, our son got healed. This is amazing, right? A supernatural work of God. This is the chosen one. This is the Messiah, the Christ, who's coming. He healed our son. Oh, shoot, they're the Pharisees. They're going to kick me out of church. Right? From the outside, the Pharisees seem like they have all the answers. They claim to have all the answers, but they willfully choose to reject the supernatural work of Jesus. Okay? The parents have been a witness to what God did. They have actually seen and been a first-hand witness. They knew Jesus did this amazing supernatural work, and yet, when the opportunity comes to give credit to God, what do? They clam up. Oh, no. Better not say anything. Don't want to offend anybody. I don't want some certain people to not like me anymore. And what about the blind man? That guy has experienced God's supernatural work in his life, and he doesn't care anymore. He's like, God, you're awesome. I love you. Right? He just wants to fall at Jesus' feet and worship him. Question is this: which one do you want to be? Right? You can be the Pharisees. You can be the parents. You can be the sheep. So the worship team is going to come up. They can come right away. They're going to play music for about a minute before they start singing. During that minute, and why doesn't everybody in the congregation stand up? During that minute, here's what I would like you to do. I want you to consider which one of those do you want to be? Pharisees, parents, or like the blind guy? And then tell Jesus who you want to be and why.